The sea has always carried whispers. Some say they're just echoes of waves colliding, the sound of the tide pulling against stone. But if you stand on the deck of a ship long enough, if you lean over the railing in the dead of night when the ocean stretches endlessly in every direction, you begin to feel something deeper. You begin to wonder if the water itself has memory, if it holds on to the secrets, the screams, the prayers that were never answered. This story begins aboard an Alaskan cruise, a trip meant to be serene, unforgettable for all the right reasons. But sometimes the places we go to seek peace only lead us into silence far more unsettling. The ship had set out from Seattle, slicing northward through waters that looked like liquid steel beneath the fading sun. Families gathered along the railings with cameras, lovers curled into one another beneath heavy jackets, and older couples walked slowly on the decks, their voices carrying soft against the wind. There was laughter, the clinking of glasses from the upper bar, and the faint sound of music spilling out of the lounge. On the surface, it was paradise. But those who boarded would later remember something else entirely. Not the laughter. Not the mountains standing like giants against the horizon. Not even the glaciers that glowed blue as frozen fire. What stayed with them were the strange moments. The silences. The vanishing. The haunting weight of being at sea when something, or someone, goes terribly wrong. It started with the couple in cabin 8237. They were quiet, reserved. No one could recall their names later, only fragments, a tall man with dark hair and a woman who wore a red scarf that seemed too delicate for the bitter wind. They were seen dining together on the second evening, sitting close but speaking little, their eyes fixed on the view through the window more than on each other. Some thought they were newlyweds, others whispered they seemed like strangers. And then, on the third day, the woman was gone. The details blurred quickly. Some claimed she had been seen standing alone on the observation deck near midnight, her scarf trailing in the wind like a ribbon of blood against the darkness. Others said she was last spotted in the lounge, her hands trembling as she nursed a glass of wine, eyes darting toward the exit as though she expected someone. The ship's announcements never mentioned her. No alarms were raised. But among the passengers, whispers spread fast. A woman missing. A cabin locked. A man who ate breakfast alone the next morning, his face pale, his hands shaking as he stirred his coffee again and again without drinking it. And then came the sound. It was faint at first, like a distant wail carried over the water. Some thought it was the cry of seabirds, others insisted it was the ship itself groaning against the current. But those who heard it in the dead of night swore it was something else entirely. A woman's voice, thin and sharp, rising from beneath the waves. Calling. Passengers began reporting strange dreams. Dreams of water flooding the hallways, of doors that wouldn't open, of faces pressed against the cabin windows from outside. Faces pale, hair drifting as though underwater. One woman woke screaming, convinced someone had been standing at the foot of her bed, dripping wet, whispering words she couldn't understand. When she turned on the light, the carpet beneath her bed was soaked. The crew came to investigate, but found nothing, no leaks, no broken pipes, no spilled water. Just a perfectly dry room, except for that single wet patch where she swore the figure had stood. By the fifth night, fear had seeped into the bones of the ship. Some passengers refused to leave their cabins after dark. Others drank heavily in the bar, trying to drown the unease with laughter that sounded hollow against the hum of the engines. Children cried in their sleep, and more than one person claimed to see a woman in a red scarf drifting through the corridors, vanishing when they tried to follow. The man from cabin 8237 remained silent. He was seen less and less, his meals delivered to his room, his curtains drawn even when the sun rose against the glaciers. Rumors grew wilder. Some whispered he had killed her. Others said she had thrown herself into the sea. A few believed she had never existed at all, that he had boarded alone, and the memories of her were something the ship itself had planted into their minds. And then came the storm. The Alaskan coast is known for its sudden tempests, winds that rise without warning, waves that tower like walls of glass. On the seventh night, the ship was swallowed by one. Passengers clung to railings, the deck slick with rain, while thunder rolled like cannon fire overhead. The ocean rose and fell with terrifying force, and through it all, a sound carried. A scream. Not of metal. Not of weather. But a woman's scream, piercing, human, and impossibly close. Crew members searched the decks, but no one was missing. Yet many swore they saw her, the woman in the red scarf, standing at the far end of the observation deck, her hair whipping in the wind, her scarf trailing like a flag of warning. Some rushed toward her, but when lightning split the sky, she was gone. The deck stood empty. When the storm passed, the ship felt changed. The air was heavy, the laughter gone. Even the sea seemed quieter, as though holding its breath. And then, in the final days of the journey, one last event sealed the story forever in the minds of those who were there. Cabin 8237 was found empty. Not just empty, abandoned. The man was gone. His clothes, his belongings, everything vanished. The bed neatly made, the drawers bare. The only trace left behind was the red scarf, folded carefully on the pillow, its fabric damp with salt water. The crew offered no explanation. Passengers were told nothing. The ship returned to Seattle on schedule, its voyage complete, its halls echoing with silence where laughter had once been. But those who stepped off the gangway carried something with them they could never put into words. Some never took another cruise again. Others spoke of the sea differently afterward, no longer romantic but unsettling, infinite, watchful. And to this day, no record exists of the couple from cabin 8237. No reservations under their names. No bookings. No trace they had ever been aboard. Only the stories of those who swore they saw them. Only the memory of the red scarf. Only the silence of the sea, which sometimes, if you listen closely enough, still carries her voice. For most passengers, the days after the storm blurred into one another. On the surface, the cruise continued as planned, buffets reopened, entertainers took the stage, and the captain announced calm seas ahead. But the atmosphere on board had shifted in a way no announcement could undo. There was a weight in the air, a quiet that lingered too long after the music stopped, a hesitation in the way people glanced toward the water. Families still took photos on deck, but their smiles looked tighter, strained, as though forced into shape for the sake of the camera. One evening, a group of friends gathered at the piano lounge. They had been loud, boisterous throughout the trip, but that night their laughter came brittle. Between songs, one of them, a woman named Carol, leaned across the polished table and whispered, "Do you remember that scream during the storm?" Her friends shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to nearby tables, worried someone might overhear. But they nodded. Every single one of them had heard it. And yet, not one could explain it. It wasn't the wind, Carol insisted. It wasn't the ship. I've never heard anything like it. It was, human. A woman. Her words landed like stones, pulling their voices down into silence. Finally, one man muttered, "I saw her. On the deck. She was standing at the very front." Lightning hit, and for a second, I swear she was looking right at me. The table fell still. No one dared laugh. Across the room, one of the crew members, a bartender, pretended not to listen, but his hands trembled slightly as he polished glasses. He had heard the same rumors, the same whispers from passengers too shaken to sleep. And he had his own memory, one he hadn't told anyone. During the storm, as rain lashed the windows of the lounge, he'd seen a figure outside on the promenade, standing in the downpour without moving, staring in through the glass. When he rushed to the door to call out, the deck was empty. But the puddles on the floor told a different story. On the lower decks, among the crew, whispers spread just as quickly. The staff knew something was wrong in cabin 8237. They delivered meals that were never touched, knocked on doors that were never answered, and collected room service trays left mysteriously outside with damp, salt-stained napkins. One housekeeper, a young man named Miguel, told others he hated cleaning that hallway. "The lights flicker there," he said. "Only on that floor. And when I'm vacuuming, sometimes I hear footsteps behind me. But when I turn around, no one's there." Another swore she had seen water seeping from under the door of 8237. She went to fetch maintenance, but when they arrived, the floor was dry. No one believed her, except those who had seen similar things elsewhere. By now, the crew avoided speaking of it directly. Instead, they shared looks, half-finished sentences, and nervous glances at the sea. Passengers, too, began to change their behavior. Couples who had once strolled the decks at night now locked their cabin doors and pulled the curtains shut before bed. Parents forbade their children from exploring alone. Even in the crowded dining halls, people sat closer together, conversations hushed, as though the very walls might be listening. One night, an elderly woman named Ruth woke to a sound in her cabin. It was subtle, like fabric dragging along the floor. At first, she thought it was her husband turning in bed. But when she glanced to her side, she saw he was fast asleep. The sound came again. A slow scrape, like something heavy being pulled. Her breath caught in her throat. She sat up, reaching for the bedside lamp, and that was when she saw it. At the foot of her bed, just beyond the edge of the light from the hallway, stood a figure. A woman. Thin. Motionless. Her head tilted slightly, her hair clinging wet against her face. And around her neck, a flash of deep red. Ruth froze. She tried to speak, to call out, but her throat closed up with terror. For a long moment, the figure did not move. And then, as though the shadows themselves swallowed her whole, the woman vanished. When Ruth finally found her voice and shook her husband awake, the room was empty. But the carpet at the foot of the bed was soaked through with seawater. The couple checked out of their cabin the next morning and spent the rest of the cruise sleeping in the lounge, unwilling to be alone. By now, stories of the red-scarfed woman traveled faster than the ship itself. Passengers swapped encounters like secrets, sightings in mirrors, reflections in windows, whispers carried through ventilation shafts. Some said she was searching for her husband. Others swore she was warning them of something darker yet to come. But the most disturbing rumor of all was whispered only in corners, when the night grew late and drinks loosened tongues. Some believed she was not missing. That she had never left the ship at all. That she was still in cabin 8237. A man named Daniel, traveling alone, made it his obsession to find out the truth. While others shied away from the cursed cabin, he lingered nearby, listening, watching. He wanted answers. On the 9th night, he pressed his ear to the door of 8237. At first, he heard nothing, only the faint hum of the engines below. But then, from within, came a sound that froze his blood. Breathing. Shallow. Uneven. He stumbled back, heart racing, but when he flagged down a passing steward and insisted they open the cabin, the keycard revealed only an empty room. No luggage. No occupant. No sound. And yet, Daniel swore the air inside smelled faintly of saltwater. The last days of the voyage moved with a strange rhythm. By day, passengers busied themselves with excursions and activities, desperate to cling to normalcy. By night, they lay awake in their cabins, listening for sounds they prayed would never come. On the final evening, the ship glided quietly back toward Seattle. The air was still, the water calm, and for the first time in days, a fragile sense of relief settled over the passengers. Many dared to believe it was over. That they would step ashore the next morning, leave the unease behind with the sea. But in the early hours, just before dawn, a scream cut through the silence. This time, there was no storm to hide it. No thunder to disguise the voice. It rang clear and sharp through the halls, a woman's scream, so loud and so real that passengers bolted upright in their bunks, clutching at each other in terror. Doors flung open. Feet thundered down corridors. Dozens swore they saw her, the woman in the red scarf, rushing past them, her footsteps echoing against the walls, her scarf streaming behind her as though caught in a wind that no one else could feel. And then, as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. The halls fell silent. The ship continued its smooth path toward port, the only sound the steady churn of the engines. When the passengers gathered in the morning, pale and exhausted, the crew said nothing. No announcement, no explanation, not even an acknowledgement of the scream that had shaken them awake. And when the gangway lowered in Seattle, every single person hurried off that ship as though fleeing. Some turned back, unable to resist a final glance. The ship loomed there in the sunlight, bright and ordinary, its white paint gleaming as though nothing had ever been wrong. But those who looked long enough swore they saw her, a woman standing on the highest deck, a red scarf wrapped tight around her neck, watching them leave with eyes as cold and endless as the sea. The voyage home should have been the end of it. Passengers clutched their luggage tighter than usual, eyes fixed forward as though afraid of what they might see if they looked back. Mothers kept their children close. Friends who had laughed together just a week earlier now spoke in clipped tones, avoiding the subject that weighed heaviest on all of them. But the sea has a way of refusing to let go. On the final night, with Seattle only hours away, the ship felt strangely hollow. The entertainment staff performed as usual, but the theater was half empty. The bars stayed open, yet the air was subdued, voices low. The decks, once crowded with eager photographers, stretched empty beneath the moonlight. It was as though the ship itself held its breath, waiting. In one of the lounges, a small group of passengers gathered. They had each experienced something during the journey, the figure at the end of the bed, the dripping footsteps, the muffled cries through the walls. They had not spoken of it openly before, but now, with the end so near, the confession spilled out like water through a crack in glass. "I dreamed of her," one man whispered. "Every night since the storm. She walks the hall outside my cabin, dragging her fingers along the wall. I hear them scraping." "I saw her reflection," another woman said. Her hands trembled around her coffee cup. "I was brushing my hair in the bathroom, and for just a moment, she was behind me. But when I turned, there was no one there." The mirror fogged up, and words appeared. One word. "Stay." The group shivered. None of them could explain it. None dared tell the crew, who continued their duties with professional smiles that looked brittle at the edges. But all of them carried the same question in their hearts: what if they weren't meant to leave? Meanwhile, Daniel, the man who had pressed his ear to cabin 8237, could not sleep. He had spent days consumed by the mystery, by the gnawing sense that the truth was right there, just beyond reach. He paced the corridor again that night, footsteps soft against the carpet, the hum of the ship steady beneath his feet. He paused outside the cabin door. For a long moment, he stared at the brass numbers, 8-2-3-7. They gleamed faintly in the hallway light. He reached out, fingers brushing the cool metal, and felt a shiver run through him. This time, he didn't knock. He simply whispered, "Are you in there?" The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. He almost turned away. But then, so faint he thought he might have imagined it, came the sound. A voice. A woman's voice, just beyond the door. "Help me," Daniel's breath caught. He pressed his palm flat against the door, heart pounding. But before he could respond, footsteps echoed at the far end of the hall. He spun, expecting another passenger, but the corridor was empty. The sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed to circle him, coming from everywhere at once. And then, silence. When he turned back, the cabin door stood slightly ajar. He hadn't touched it. Slowly, with a hand that trembled despite himself, he pushed it open. Inside, the room was spotless. Too spotless. No luggage, no clothes, no trace of occupation. Only the bed, neatly made, the white sheets glowing faintly in the dim light. On the pillow lay the red scarf. Its fabric shimmered with moisture, as though fresh from the sea. A scent of salt and brine filled the air. Daniel reached for it, hesitant, his fingers grazing the cloth, and a chill surged through him so violently he staggered back. The scarf slipped from the pillow, falling soundlessly to the floor. And when it did, the room changed. The air grew heavy. The lights flickered. Shadows thickened in the corners. And from the bathroom came the slow, unmistakable sound of water dripping. Daniel's breath came shallow. Step by step, as though pulled by some unseen force, he moved toward the door. He pushed it open, and froze. The tub was full. Not just full, overflowing, water spilling silently over the sides onto the tile. The surface rippled as though disturbed by something beneath. And there, just beneath the waterline, a pale face stared up at him. A woman's face. Her eyes wide, unblinking. Her hair drifting like dark seaweed. Her lips moving silently, forming words he couldn't hear. Daniel stumbled back, a strangled cry tearing from his throat. But before he could flee, the bathroom light flared, and the tub was empty. Bone dry. The tiles spotless. Only the faint scent of salt water lingered. The scarf lay at his feet, damp against the carpet. The next morning, Daniel was gone. Passengers saw him at dinner, pale and shaken, but he never returned to his cabin that night. When the ship docked in Seattle, his belongings were still neatly folded in his room, his suitcase untouched. But he was nowhere to be found. The crew offered no explanation. Just as they had with the missing woman. Just as they would again. Because some absences can't be explained. When passengers disembarked, a silence followed them home. Some tried to dismiss it, telling themselves it had been nothing but nerves, imagination, the tricks of a restless sea. But at night, alone in their beds, many of them woke to the same sound. The sound of water dripping where no water should be. And sometimes, just before sleep claimed them, they swore they felt something soft brush against their throat. A whisper of fabric. The trace of a scarf. The ship itself returned to sea weeks later, carrying new passengers, new laughter, new lives unaware of the stories lingering in its halls. Cabin 8237 was cleaned, polished, and offered to travelers who marveled at the view of endless water through its window. But the crew knew better. They avoided that room when they could. They spoke of it only in half-sentences, their eyes shifting toward the horizon. And when asked directly, they smiled the kind of smile that meant silence. Because the truth is this, the sea does not forget. It carries every secret, every scream, every soul that vanishes into its depths. It waits, patient and endless, for the next story to unfold. And somewhere out there, in the quiet hours of night when the ocean stretches black and infinite, a woman in a red scarf is still searching. Still waiting. Still whispering through the sound of the waves. So if you ever find yourself standing on the deck of a ship, the wind tugging at your clothes, the horizon endless before you, listen closely. You may hear her voice calling from beneath the waves. Or worse, you may feel her standing just behind you. Watching. They say once you've sailed the Alaskan coast, the ocean never leaves you. It lingers in your bones, a salt-stained echo that hums whenever you close your eyes at night. I thought what I experienced on that voyage was singular, a dark story whispered into the waves and swallowed forever. But I was wrong. The sea does not let go. It only waits for the next ship, the next secret, the next unraveling. And so I tell you this, Alaska was not the only place where the ocean showed me its teeth. The second story comes from a Royal Caribbean cruise, one of those gleaming giants of glass and steel that promise fun, freedom, and a floating city in the middle of nowhere. On brochures, it looked like paradise at sea. A place of endless buffets, glimmering pools, Broadway-style shows, and ports that shimmered like postcards. But behind the staged smiles and the carefully managed image of perfection, something else stirred. The ship's name still rings in my head. Its letters were bold on the hull, painted bright against the horizon as if daring the sea itself to challenge it. Royal Caribbean sells itself on scale, an empire of entertainment above the waterline. Multiple decks stacked high, glass elevators racing from floor to floor, whole neighborhoods recreated on board, even a replica boardwalk with a carousel spinning under artificial lights. It was supposed to feel safe. It was supposed to feel like the ocean had been tamed. But the thing about the ocean is that it doesn't care how much steel you build. It doesn't care how many smiling cruise directors tell you to relax. It waits. The first night on board, I felt it again, that quiet vibration beneath the glamour. The ship's atrium was alive with light and sound. Couples dressed for dinner laughed as they took photographs by a sweeping staircase. Bartenders twirled bottles, sending liquid arcing into crystal glasses. A piano played in the corner, the keys chased by a singer with a voice like velvet. It was beautiful. And yet, I caught myself staring past it all, into the shadowed corners where no one else seemed to look. There was a man there. Or at least I thought there was. He stood near the glass elevator shaft, hands tucked into his pockets, watching. Not the show. Not the people laughing around the bar. He was watching me. I blinked, and when my eyes opened again, he was gone. The rational part of me said I imagined it. That the reflections and refracted light had tricked my eyes. But deep down, I knew. The sea has a way of carrying shadows from ship to ship, like passengers who never check out. By the second day, whispers had started. Not from the crew, they were professionals, all smiles, all scripted reassurance, but from the passengers. You could hear it if you listened in the right places, the low murmur in the buffet line, the hushed tones at the edge of the solarium. Someone had gone missing. The details were slippery, shifting depending on who told them. A young woman who hadn't come back to her cabin. A man last seen stumbling down a hallway after too many drinks. A crew member who simply stopped reporting for duty. Nothing confirmed, nothing announced over the loudspeakers. Just fragments of rumor passed like contraband. I wanted to dismiss it as gossip, but the feeling in my chest told me otherwise. That same pressure I had felt in Alaska, like the air itself, was thicker, harder to breathe. I found myself checking behind me more often as I walked the decks. I found myself pausing outside the closed doors of crew-only areas, listening for movement on the other side. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered the ship alone. Past midnight, the vessel felt different. The cheerful chaos of the day gave way to long, empty corridors lit only by dull emergency bulbs. The pools were drained of people, the deck chairs stacked like forgotten bones. Music still played faintly somewhere, but it was distorted, muffled, as if it came from beneath the floorboards. I stopped near the theater, where tomorrow's show poster was already hung. Smiling faces in sequins promised joy and laughter. But in the reflection of the glass, I swore I saw that same man again. The one from the atrium. His face was blurred, not by distance, but by something else, like the reflection itself didn't want me to see him clearly. He was closer this time. And then I heard it, a woman's laugh. Sharp, sudden, too close. My heart jolted. I spun, but the hallway was empty. The laugh didn't sound like joy. It sounded like a warning. By the third night, the ship had developed an edge. People were quieter at dinner. Conversations that had been carefree turned cautious, voices lowered as if afraid to be overheard. A couple at my table refused to talk about what they'd seen outside their balcony window the night before, but their pale faces said enough. One passenger claimed a lifeboat had shifted in its davits in the dead of night, swinging like something heavy had pressed against it. The crew brushed it off as routine checks. But no one believed them. Not really. It was on that same night that I discovered something strange near the lower decks, where few passengers ever ventured. A hallway that seemed too long, stretching farther than the ship's schematics could allow. At first, I thought I had simply taken a wrong turn. But as I walked, the air grew colder. The hum of the engines deepened into a low groan. And the corridor itself, it didn't end. No matter how far I went, it just kept going. I turned back, certain I'd retraced my steps. Yet when I looked again, I was still in the same place. The same flickering light. The same sealed metal doors with faded paint. And then, footsteps. Not mine. Someone was following. I forced myself to keep walking, though every instinct screamed to run. The sound of the steps grew louder, closing in behind me, until finally, I broke into a desperate sprint. My chest burned, my legs screamed, but still, the hallway refused to end. When I dared to glance back, I saw nothing. No figure. No face. Just the emptiness of that impossible passage. At last, after what felt like an eternity, I stumbled through a doorway, and found myself back in the brightly lit promenade, as if nothing had happened. The laughter of late-night revelers echoed around me. Music swelled from a nearby bar. The impossible corridor was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I don't think anyone truly did. Because by morning, there were new whispers. This time, louder. Clearer. Another passenger was missing. And this time, someone swore they saw it happen. After that harrowing encounter on Deck 16, the ship felt different. Not just different, it felt watched, like some vast, indifferent organism that knew every secret corner, every hidden stairwell, every corridor where a shadow could linger. The hum of the engines, once comforting, now sounded like a heartbeat, irregular, slow, deliberate, and echoing through the steel skeleton of the vessel. Rebecca's hand gripped mine tighter than before, and Aiden's silence weighed heavier than words. We walked down the promenade, past closed doors of shops still lit from the day, past lounge chairs stacked neatly as though the cleaners had prepared for a funeral rather than breakfast, past the pool deck where only a single deck chair rocked slightly in the morning breeze. The entire ship seemed to exhale around us, its breath mingling with the scent of salt and diesel and the faint tang of chlorine from the pool. I noticed the other passengers for the first time in a different light. Faces I had seen as ordinary, vacationing strangers, now seemed almost spectral. People moved in careful, cautious patterns, whispering in small clusters that dissolved whenever they noticed someone else listening. Every glance felt measured, every step deliberate, like we were all tiptoeing around a reality too fragile to acknowledge aloud. Rebecca, still gripping Aiden's shoulder lightly, whispered, "He could have been anywhere, just anywhere." Her voice trembled despite her effort to remain calm. It was true. On a ship this size, in the middle of the Atlantic, anyone could disappear behind a corner, down a stairwell, into a maintenance corridor no guest ever sees, and vanish completely. The thought made my pulse jump. 7 decks above the ocean. Endless corridors. Stairwells that seemed to fold back on themselves. The ship became a labyrinth, and every shadow a potential threat. We decided to retreat to the cabin, to give Aiden some semblance of comfort. The hallway leading back was eerily quiet. No laughter, no clatter of footsteps, only the low, steady vibration of the engines beneath our feet. Our keycard slid into the lock, but before the door fully opened, a faint sound made me freeze, a whisper, almost inaudible, carried from the far end of the hall. It could have been the wind, the metal hull flexing, or the distant echo of a guest stirring in their cabin. But it sounded human. Aiden froze too, eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice small. I nodded, though I could not tell if I was more afraid of the sound or what it implied. Rebecca motioned for him to step inside the cabin first, and I followed, closing the door gently behind me. For a few minutes, the silence inside felt safer than the corridors outside. Yet, the ship never really goes silent. There is always a faint hum, a sigh of metal, a whisper of water against hull, and that subtle, omnipresent reminder that beneath our feet lies 1,000 tons of moving, indifferent ocean. The next hours passed in a surreal blur. Breakfast at the buffet felt like an exhibition in staged normalcy. The trays of scrambled eggs and crispy bacon, the steaming coffee pots, the clatter of plates, all of it seemed oddly disconnected from the terror of the night before. People spoke in hushed tones, eyes darting to every doorway, every shadowed corner, as if expecting the figure in black to emerge from any open stairwell. Every laugh, every casual conversation carried a note of tension, a tremor that betrayed the fragile composure we all tried to maintain. Aiden did not eat. He refused to leave the cabin, and Rebecca ordered room service, letting him stay in the lower bunk, headphones in, movies playing silently. Rick tried to make light of it, joking about teenage curiosity, but the joke sounded hollow, brittle, like dry twigs snapping underfoot. I busied myself with customs forms, paperwork, small administrative tasks, anything to keep my hands from shaking. Each creak of the ship, each distant thump or echo, made me pause, imagining a shadow slipping along a corridor, a hand resting momentarily on a railing, the quiet movement of a figure waiting for the right moment. By mid-afternoon, the weather had begun to change. Gray clouds rolled across the horizon, wind whipping the decks into whitecaps that slapped against the hull. The captain's voice came over the public system, calm yet slightly uneasy, warning of rough seas ahead. A small shiver ran through the passengers, an acknowledgement that we were not merely observers of the ocean but participants in its unpredictability. The ship groaned as it leaned into the swell, a reminder that the Atlantic does not forgive carelessness. Later, I ventured up to deck 12 to check the forward observation lounge. The lights inside cast long, flickering shadows across the polished floor. The lounge was empty, save for a single chair facing the bow. I sat for a while, staring at the rolling water, watching the waves collide with the ship's prow. The sound was hypnotic, yet every crest and trough seemed to carry a whisper, a murmur that made me glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see a figure in black standing silently behind me. But there was nothing. Just the endless ocean, stretching like a void into the horizon. Night came quickly. The ship's lights reflected off the waves, a scattering of pale golds and silvers, shimmering over the restless water. I could hear the distant music from the deck below, the soft strains of a piano, laughter, clinking glasses, all muffled, almost dreamlike. I climbed to deck 15, the promenade level, hoping for fresh air and a moment of clarity. The wind was sharp, biting against my cheeks, carrying the smell of salt and diesel. Somewhere below, engines throbbed steadily, a reminder of the ship's immense power. Yet power could not protect us from human unpredictability, from those few moments where life tips and chaos intrudes. It was there, leaning against the railing, that I saw it, a shadow moving just beyond the glow of the deck lights. At first, I thought it was another passenger. Late-night wanderers were not uncommon. But the shape was wrong, too thin, too tall, moving with a smoothness that was almost unnatural. I froze, heart hammering. The figure paused, as though aware of my gaze, then tilted its head slightly. I could not see a face, just the outline of black clothing blending with the dark night. The figure seemed to vanish into the shadows without stepping, as though it had slipped between reality and something else entirely. I ran down to deck 10, the midship level, where our cabin lay. Rebecca was there, waiting for Aiden, pacing. "I thought I heard something," I said, breathless. She frowned, looking past me at the hallway, eyes wide. "It's the wind," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. We checked on Aiden, who remained huddled in the lower bunk, headphones in, the glow of the screen painting his face pale blue. He had said nothing about the shadow, and perhaps it was better that way. Some knowledge is heavier than the mind can bear. Hours passed. The ship rocked, the engines hummed, and I could not sleep. I lay in the upper bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the low vibrations of the vessel, imagining every corridor, every stairwell, every locked door and shadowed corner, picturing what could hide there. The mind fills silence with shapes, stories, fears that might never manifest, yet still feel urgent, immediate, real. And when a distant thump echoed through the walls, I could not tell if it was merely the ship or something else entirely. By the time morning broke, pale and muted, the atmosphere among passengers had changed. Whispers spread quickly, sightings of a figure on deck late at night, reports of strange noises, claims that a guest had seen someone vanish before their eyes. The cruise director made the usual cheerful announcements, but the usual warmth and excitement were absent. Faces were drawn, eyes weary, movements careful. Even the pool decks, once filled with laughter and splashing, seemed muted, restrained, as if the passengers themselves were holding their collective breath. Breakfast felt surreal. The buffet stretched along the deck, trays of scrambled eggs, pastries, fresh fruit, steaming coffee, yet nobody seemed hungry. Each bite felt like a ritual, a small attempt to reclaim normalcy in a world that had tilted overnight. People avoided looking at one another too long. Conversations were clipped, polite, filled with small talk and carefully monitored laughter. The shadow lingered in my mind, stretching across corridors, deck levels, and stairwells, a reminder that the previous night was not merely an anomaly but perhaps a warning of how fragile our sense of safety truly is. I spent the remainder of the day documenting, walking the ship, checking public areas, observing crew routines, trying to make sense of what had happened and what could happen. Everywhere I went, the ship felt alive in ways I had never noticed before, the subtle hiss of pressurized pipes, the metallic groan as decks flexed with the swell, the faint smell of diesel mingling with saltwater. The ship itself seemed aware of its occupants, every creak and vibration a message, a reminder of the thin divide between security and vulnerability. Evening fell like a curtain, heavy and deliberate. The sun dipped low, casting elongated shadows across the promenade, the railings, the deck chairs. I lingered on deck 12, staring at the water, trying to convince myself that what I had seen, the figure, the shadow, was a trick of light and exhaustion. But the intuition in my chest, a primal, unrelenting pressure, told me it was not. And then came the sound, soft, deliberate, footsteps echoing faintly from a corridor I knew to be empty. Slow, measured, pressing against the rhythm of the ship's natural creaks. I froze. The sound stopped. Then another, closer this time, accompanied by a faint metallic clink, as if a key had been dropped or a cart had been nudged. My pulse spiked. I reached for my phone, ready to dial guest services, but the moment stretched, taut and silent. I could not see the source. The deck was empty. Somewhere within the ship, the shadow waited. Somewhere among the winding corridors, behind doors and under stairwells, something had observed us, learned us, and disappeared, leaving only the echo of possibility behind. The night would not pass quietly. Not this night. Not on a ship that carried hundreds of passengers, all trusting in key cards, cameras, and crew. Trust is a fragile construct on a vessel like this, and as I would soon learn, sometimes it is only a matter of moments before it fractures entirely. And as I turned back toward the cabin, the corridor stretching long and metallic ahead of me, I realized the most unnerving truth: the ocean below is vast, dark, and unknowable. The sky above mirrors it. And somewhere in between, on this floating city of steel and light, the line between safety and peril is thinner than a railing, thinner than a shadow, thinner than a heartbeat. The next morning, the air on deck carried a brittle chill. The storm from the previous night had passed, leaving the sea restless but eerily calm, like a beast sated yet alert. Passengers emerged cautiously from their cabins, faces pale, movements slow, conversations tentative. No one spoke of the shadowed figure directly, but every glance, every whispered word, betrayed a collective unease. The crew's staff moved briskly, offering smiles and reassurances, yet their eyes, too, darted to corners and stairwells, betraying a shared acknowledgement that something was amiss. Rebecca and Aiden stayed close. He refused breakfast again, though Rebecca managed to coax him with the promise of pancakes and chocolate syrup. I watched the pair as they walked the promenade with tentative steps, Aiden clutching Rebecca's hand as if letting go meant instant disappearance. And perhaps, in the labyrinthine corridors of the ship, with shadows that moved on their own accord, letting go could indeed bring danger. By mid-morning, whispers had escalated into murmurs, and murmurs into anxiety. Passengers began reporting strange occurrences: doors unlocked on their own, lights flickering in empty hallways, the distant echo of footsteps following them, only to vanish when they turned to look. Some swore they saw fleeting shapes in the corner of their eyes, figures that dissolved when confronted, shadows that seemed too fluid, too deliberate, to be natural. I decided to investigate. Alone, I wandered deck by deck, noting the subtle inconsistencies: a chair slightly moved from its usual place, a stairwell door ajar when it had been locked, the faint metallic scent of something I could not identify. The ship itself seemed to pulse beneath my feet, alive in a way that was disquieting, as though it were a predator, watching, judging, deciding when and where to intervene. It was on deck 14, in a hallway near the observation lounge, that I felt the presence again. At first, it was subtle, a cold draft, the kind that seeps under doors. Then a faint sound, the soft, deliberate click of shoes against metal. I froze, every nerve alight. The hallway stretched long, empty, illuminated only by the pale overhead lights. And then I saw it, the figure, distant at first, black as shadow, standing perfectly still near a stairwell. Its head tilted, as if studying me, assessing. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I wanted to call out, to confront it, but the voice in my head warned against it. This was no ordinary person. The figure moved with an unnatural fluidity, almost gliding, its presence more psychological than physical. I took a cautious step forward, and it vanished. Gone. The stairwell, the floor, the corridor, everything normal, untouched, but the lingering dread remained, a tangible weight pressing against my chest. I stumbled back toward Rebecca and Aiden, who were waiting near the deck railing, eyes scanning the horizon. The ship rocked gently, but the motion offered no comfort. I saw it, I whispered. It's real. It's here. Rebecca's grip on Aiden tightened. We need to stay together, she said. Her voice was steady, commanding, but I could feel the tremor beneath. Wherever we go, we do not separate. As the day waned, the ship's atmosphere thickened with tension. Crew members moved with brisk efficiency, but even they seemed wary, avoiding certain corridors, adjusting schedules in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Passengers clustered in small groups, eyes darting to shadows, hands clutching phones, ready to record evidence, even as they whispered fears they dared not speak aloud. Evening fell, and with it came the climax. A call over the public address system announced a scheduled safety drill, a routine procedure, they claimed. But the timing felt deliberate. Passengers were to gather in the main atrium. I stayed with Rebecca and Aiden, weaving through the growing crowd, hearts pounding, senses sharpened. The atrium, usually filled with laughter and music, felt cavernous, empty, and hollow. Lights glowed faintly, casting long shadows across the polished floors. And then it happened. The figure appeared. Not in a corner, not fleetingly, but emerging from the upper balcony of the atrium, gliding silently, motionless, black against the dim lights. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Phones were raised, but footage captured only a blur, a shadow indistinct and fluid. People froze, staring, some screaming, others backing away instinctively. Rebecca grabbed Aiden, pulling him close. I stood my ground, unable to look away, mesmerized, terrified. The figure moved down toward the center of the atrium, and with each step, or absence of step, the air grew colder, heavier. Whispers of panic, confusion, disbelief filled the space. Crew members tried to intervene, but as they approached, the figure dissolved into shadow, reappearing elsewhere in the atrium, as though teleporting through the crowd, observing, studying, asserting dominance over the space. It was a predator, not of flesh, but of fear, feeding on disbelief, uncertainty, the fragile trust passengers had in safety. Then, abruptly, it vanished. Just like that. The lights flickered. A low hum resonated through the hull, and the ship seemed to exhale, releasing the tension, yet leaving a residue of unease that clung to every person present. The crowd murmured, half in relief, half in dread. Some cried, others prayed, all shook in disbelief. The captain's voice came over the PA system, calm, rehearsed, assuring passengers that all was safe, that it had been a technical malfunction. But no one believed it. Not truly. In the aftermath, the ship continued its journey, but the shadow lingered in memory, in whispered stories among passengers, in glances cast down empty corridors. Rebecca and Aiden remained close, but the boy no longer spoke of the figure. Perhaps he understood, instinctively, that naming it gave it power. Perhaps he, too, had glimpsed a truth too vast for words. Days later, as the ship approached port, the crew moved efficiently, tidying, preparing for disembarkation. The sun rose over the horizon, painting the waves gold and silver. Passengers packed, silent, reflective, haunted in ways subtle yet profound. The ship, a vessel of both wonder and terror, glided through the water, carrying with it the unspoken story of a shadow, a presence, and a reminder that sometimes, the unknown is closer than we imagine. Rebecca, Aiden, and I stood on the upper deck, watching the shoreline approach. "Do you think it's gone?" Rebecca asked, voice trembling slightly. I did not answer. The shadow, whatever it was, had left its mark. Perhaps it had moved on. Perhaps it waited for another night, another unsuspecting deck, another traveler vulnerable to fear. The Atlantic was vast, yes, but within its reach, nothing is truly safe. As we disembarked, the ship behind us gleaming in the morning sun, a quiet understanding settled over us. We had survived, yes. But some events, some presences, are never truly left behind. They linger in memory, in the way hallways feel narrower, shadows darker, the night more tangible. And as the port pulled us back to land, the truth was undeniable, the ocean below, the sky above, the endless horizon between, it is in that space that fear lives, and sometimes, it watches. Rebecca held Aiden close. I exhaled, feeling both relief and a hollow emptiness, a residue of tension that would not leave. We had journeyed through the unknown, stared into something beyond comprehension, and returned. But the story would never end. The shadow would remain, not in physical form, but in the subtle impressions it left, the marks on memory, the echo of fear that never fully fades. And as we walked toward the waiting shuttle buses, the ship behind us fading into the distance, I realized something crucial: survival is not measured in escape. Survival is measured in awareness, in the understanding that the world is larger, stranger, and darker than we often dare to imagine. And sometimes, even in daylight, even in crowds, even when logic insists it cannot exist, shadows remain, watching, waiting, reminding us of the fragile boundary between safety and the unknown. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, serene and unforgiving. The ship, a silent giant now at rest, carried memories and secrets, as all ships do. And for us, the passengers who had witnessed the inexplicable, the journey had changed more than our location. It had shifted our perception, nudged our reality, and left us aware that fear is not always external. Sometimes, it resides quietly, patient, within the corridors of memory, in the spaces between breaths, waiting for the next moment, the next story, the next traveler. We never spoke of the figure again. But in quiet moments, in the soft hum of engines or the whisper of waves, I know we all remember. And in remembering, we carry a piece of the shadow with us, a reminder of that night, that ship, and the unshakable truth: not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some exist only to remind us how small, how vulnerable, and how profoundly human we truly are.